An elderly man walks into a luxury car dealership, dressed in worn clothes and scuffed shoes. Ignored and humiliated by the staff. No one realizes they've just underestimated the most powerful person in the room. Behind his humble facade lies a secret that will turn everything upside down. Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey. The sun cast sharp reflections off the gleaming windshields of luxury cars parked in neat rows outside Kensington Motors, one of the city's most prestigious car dealerships. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather seats, polished chrome, and designer cologne. Salesmen in sharp suits weave through the showroom, flashing perfect smiles at wealthy customers who examine high-end sedans and sports cars under the bright showroom lights. Amidst this scene of affluence and polished presentation stood an elderly man, Oliver Grant. His worn wool coat hung loosely over his shoulders, and his scuffed shoes barely made a sound against the glossy marble floor. His pale blue eyes, however, shone with quiet interest as he walked slowly past the luxury vehicles, pausing briefly at a sleek black sedan with tinted windows and a polished finish that gleamed like a mirror. Oliver reached out a trembling hand and let his fingers trail along the car's surface. His eyes softened with a distant look, as though he could already feel the leather steering wheel beneath his palms. But his quiet admiration went unnoticed, or rather, was deliberately ignored. A group of salesmen stood nearby, chatting amongst themselves. One of them, Garrett Sloan, a sharply dressed young man with slick back hair and a smug smile, glanced at Oliver briefly before returning his attention to his phone. After a few moments, Oliver cleared his throat and approached Garrett cautiously. "Excuse me, young man. I was wondering if I could ask a few questions about this model here." Garrett looked up slowly, his expression flat and disinterested. His eyes scanned Oliver from head to toe, lingering on the frayed cuffs of his coat and the worn-out leather of his shoes. Without bothering to hide his annoyance, Garrett let out a shallow sigh and said, "We're a bit busy at the moment. Sir, why don't you come back later when it's less crowded?" The words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive. Oliver's shoulders sank slightly, but he said nothing. Garrett had already turned back to his phone, his thumb scrolling lazily across the screen. Oliver stepped back, his gaze flickering briefly to the other salesmen. None of them made eye contact. None of them stepped forward to help. He turned back to the black sedan, his hand hovering above the polished surface one final time before letting it drop to his side. For 20 minutes, Oliver stood in the showroom, hands clasped behind his back, observing the cars, listening to the buzz of conversations, and waiting, hoping that someone would acknowledge him. But no one did. Eventually, Oliver turned and began walking toward the glass doors. As he passed by the reception desk, he caught a snippet of laughter from two salesmen nearby. "Window shopper," one of them muttered under his breath. "Can't waste time on folks like that," another chuckled. The words stung, sharp as splinters. Oliver kept walking, his head held high and his back straight. But the humiliation clung to him like a heavy weight. Outside, the cold wind bit at his face as he stepped onto the sidewalk. For a moment, he paused and looked back at the glittering showroom through the glass walls. His reflection stared back at him, worn and unassuming against the backdrop of luxury and excess. But beneath his modest exterior, something flickered, an ember of quiet resolve, a glimmer of steel in his pale blue eyes. Without another glance, Oliver Grant turned and walked away, his steps slow but purposeful. The staff at Kensington Motors had judged him based on his appearance, dismissing him as nothing more than a waste of time. But they had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. Some lessons, Oliver thought as he disappeared into the city streets. Must be learned the hard way. The glow of a single desk lamp illuminated the modest living room of Oliver Grant's small home. The space was tidy, but unadorned, no lavish decorations, no expensive furniture. Instead, the room was dominated by shelves lined with neatly labeled binders and stacks of financial documents arranged with meticulous precision. Oliver sat in an armchair, a steaming cup of tea by his side, as he flipped through a thick investment portfolio. For decades, Oliver had quietly built his fortune through disciplined investments and sharp financial instincts. He wasn't one for extravagant displays of wealth or unnecessary luxuries. Every dollar he earned had been carefully reinvested, growing steadily over the years into a vast fortune. Few people knew the extent of his wealth because Oliver preferred it that way. The previous day's events at Kensington Motors replayed in his mind: the dismissive glance, the smug remark, the laughter that followed him as he walked away. But rather than bitterness, Oliver felt something sharper: purpose. He reached for his phone and made a series of calls, each brief and to the point. Contacts were activated, financial levers pulled, and legal documents set in motion. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the ink was dry on a purchase agreement. Kensington Motors was his. Oliver set the documents down on his desk and took a long sip of tea, his pale blue eyes fixed on the horizon outside his window. It wasn't revenge he was after, it was change. Later that morning, Oliver Grant stepped back into Kensington Motors. The same worn coat hung over his shoulders. The same scuffed shoes tapped softly on the pristine marble floor. The salesmen were back at their stations, their bright smiles reserved for customers who exuded wealth and status. At the center of the showroom stood Thomas Green, the general manager. Thomas was a tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccably tailored suit, with a grin that never quite reached his eyes. He spotted Oliver almost immediately and strode over, his polished loafers clicking with every step. "Good morning, sir," Thomas said, his voice dripping with forced politeness. "Is there something I can help you with today?" Oliver met Thomas's gaze calmly and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a thick folder bound with legal seals. "You can start by reading this," Oliver said evenly, handing over the folder. Thomas frowned slightly as he took the documents, flipping open the cover page. His eyes scanned the lines of text, and the color drained from his face. His hands began to tremble as realization set in. This can't be right," Thomas stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. You bought the dealership?" "Yes," Oliver replied, his voice steady and calm. "As of this morning, Kensington Motors belongs to me." A hush fell over the showroom. Salesmen stopped mid-conversation. Customers glanced around awkwardly, and Garrett Sloan, leaning casually against a nearby car, stared at Oliver with his mouth slightly open. Oliver didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment spoke louder than any words could. "I'll be making some changes around here," Oliver continued, tucking his hands into his coat pockets. "But for now, I'll let you all process this news." Thomas's lips moved soundlessly as he tried to formulate a response, but nothing came out. Garrett's phone slipped slightly in his hand as his usual smirk dissolved into a look of pure disbelief. Oliver turned his back to them and began walking toward the manager's office at the rear of the showroom, leaving behind a stunned silence. The power dynamics had shifted in an instant. Oliver Grant, the elderly man dismissed as a window shopper, was now their employer. And whether they realized it yet or not, Kensington Motors was about to change forever. In that quiet, powerful moment, one thing became clear: Oliver wasn't here for petty revenge. He was here to rebuild, to create something better. Something lasting. But first, the dead wood would need to be cleared. The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kensington Motors, casting long shadows across the polished showroom floor. The dealership was unusually silent as staff members gathered in the center of the showroom, their faces tight with apprehension. The weight of the previous day's revelation hung heavy in the air. Standing at the front of the assembled crowd was Oliver Grant, wearing the same modest coat and scuffed shoes as always. But now, he was the man in charge. Oliver surveyed the crowd with a calm but piercing gaze. His voice, steady and clear, carried through the silence. "Good morning, everyone. As you all know by now, Kensington Motors is under new ownership. But this isn't just about a change in leadership, it's about a change in culture." Some staff members shifted uncomfortably, while others, like Garrett Sloan, kept their eyes firmly on the floor. "For too long," Oliver continued, "this dealership has operated under a culture of arrogance, favoritism, and disrespect. That ends today. Every customer who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or how much money they might spend. From now on, respect, integrity, and fairness will define this workplace. If anyone feels they cannot align with these values, you are free to leave." A murmur rippled through the staff. Oliver's calm delivery made his words feel heavier, more final. Thomas Green, the dealership's former general manager, stood slightly apart from the crowd, arms crossed over his chest. His face was pale, but his jaw was set in defiance. Oliver turned to face him directly. "Thomas Green, as the leader of this dealership, you are responsible for setting the tone of this workplace. Instead, you fostered an environment where judgment and disrespect thrived. I cannot and will not allow that to continue. Effective immediately. You are dismissed." The words rang out like a gavel striking wood. Thomas's mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came out. His shoulders slumped, and without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The staff parted silently as he passed, his polished shoes clicking one last time against the marble floor before the glass doors closed behind him. The air felt lighter in his absence. But Oliver wasn't finished. His gaze shifted to Garrett Sloan, who stood frozen beside a bright red sports car, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Garrett," Oliver said evenly. Garrett flinched at the sound of his name and slowly looked up. "I remember you," Oliver continued. "You were quick to dismiss me when I asked for assistance. Quick to judge me based on my coat and my shoes. Do you understand now how wrong you were?" Garrett nodded weakly, his usual bravado completely gone. "I'm not going to fire you today, Garrett. Instead, I want you to take some time to think about what happened here. Consider this your opportunity to prove to me and to yourself that you can do better. But make no mistake, if you can't change, you won't have a place here." Garrett swallowed hard and nodded again, unable to meet Oliver's gaze. A quiet voice spoke up from the side of the crowd. "Mr. Grant?" It was Laura Bennett, the junior saleswoman who had offered Oliver a kind smile during his previous visit. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. Oliver smiled faintly. "Laura, step forward." She hesitated, then took a few cautious steps until she stood in front of him. "Laura, you showed kindness and respect when no one else here did. That's the kind of attitude I want to see in every corner of this dealership. Effective immediately. I'm promoting you to floor manager. I believe you have the potential to lead by example." Laura's eyes went wide. "Thank you." Mr. Grant. I won't let you down. Oliver nodded. I know you won't. Around them. The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, some inspired, and a few visibly uneasy. Oliver took a step back and addressed the team one final time. This isn't going to be an easy transition. Some of you might struggle with the changes ahead. But I promise you this, if you stay, if you commit to the vision I've laid out today, this dealership will become something we can all be proud of. By the end of the day, several more dismissals were made. Those who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new standards were shown the door. But those who remained began to rally behind Oliver's vision, inspired by his quiet strength and clear expectations. In Laura's promotion, the staff saw hope. In Thomas's departure, they saw accountability. And in Garrett's uneasy reckoning, they saw the possibility of redemption. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over Kensington Motors, the dealership felt different, like a weight had been lifted. And at the center of it all stood Oliver Grant, a man who had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, now quietly reshaping an empire with patience, wisdom, and unwavering resolve. Under the golden morning light, Kensington Motors thrived like never before. The once cold and unwelcoming showroom now buzzed with warmth and energy. Customers were greeted with genuine smiles. Conversations flowed with ease. And the air carried a sense of mutual respect. The transformation was undeniable. Sales had skyrocketed. Customer reviews glowed with praise. And word of the dealership's exceptional service spread far and wide. Laura Bennett, now floor manager, moved confidently across the showroom. Her leadership style, defined by fairness and empathy, had become the heartbeat of the dealership. Staff members, once skeptical of the changes, now worked together seamlessly, driven by a shared commitment to Oliver Grant's vision. At the back of the showroom, near the same sleek black sedan that had once caught his eye, Oliver stood quietly. His hands rested in the pockets of his worn coat, and his pale blue eyes scanned the bustling floor with quiet satisfaction. He had no desire for applause or recognition. Seeing the positive change was reward enough. Laura approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. Grant," she said softly, her voice carrying over the hum of activity. "The black sedan, you admired it once before. Would you like to take it for a drive? It's yours if you want it." Oliver's gaze shifted to the car, its polished surface gleaming under the showroom lights. He let out a soft chuckle and shook his head. "No, Laura," he said gently. "It's enough to know that others will get to enjoy it. Success isn't about what we own, it's about what we build and who we lift along the way." Laura nodded, her smile widening as she took in the weight of his words. As the day continued, Oliver strolled through the showroom one last time. Staff members greeted him with nods of respect. Customers chatted happily with attentive salespeople. And the dealership felt alive in a way it never had before. With a faint smile, Oliver turned and walked toward the glass doors. As they slid open, the crisp morning air greeted him. He stepped outside, the faint sound of laughter and lively chatter following him. Oliver Grant didn't need fanfare or grand gestures. The legacy he had built spoke for itself: a thriving business, a reformed culture, and a reminder to everyone that true success is measured not by wealth, but by the lives we touch and the respect we show.
Do you think appearances still dictate how people are treated in our world today? Share your thoughts below and let us know what you would have done in Andrew's place. Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.